the Orthodox Network Awareness and Education Forum, Alcohol Misuse in the Orthodox Jewish Community, Prevention, Problems, and Solutions, Monday, May 4th, 2015, 9 a.m., at Virginia Frank Child Development Center, 3033 West Touhy Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. This forum features a panel including the following speakers: Rabbi Shaanan Gelman, Rabbi Kehilat Chovevei Tzion, Skokie; Yankie Greenberger, LCSW, Clinical Director, Madraigos Midwest, Chicago; Beth Fishman, Ph.D., Manager, Jewish Center for Addiction at Jewish Child and Family Services; and Rebecca Jacobson, LSW, Outreach and Prevention Specialist, Jewish Center for Addiction, Response, Chicago, Illinois. Welcome, communal professionals, rabbis, and leaders. I am Rabbi David Rosenberg, Orthodox Community Liaison and Coordinator of Jewish Educational Services for Jewish Child and Family Services. On behalf of the Orthodox Network and the Network's Forum Planning Group, I would like to welcome you to our fifth forum, Awareness and Education, Alcohol Misuse in the Orthodox Jewish Community, Prevention, Problems, and Solutions. The 9th chapter of the biblical book of Judges, Shoftim, describes a discussion among the trees, one of which is the vine. The vine says, "Have I stopped yielding my new wine, which gladdens God and men?" In the Jewish tradition, wine, a category of alcoholic beverages, is associated with private joy and with wine offerings accompanied by the joyous singing of Levites in the temple. By the same token, alcohol can lead one astray. Calamity strikes Noah after a bout of drinking. Drinking alcohol is one of the errors of the rebellious son, Ben Sora Umoreh. In the Talmud, the prophet Elijah counsels, "Lo tirve v'lo techte," do not get drunk and you won't sin. Our forum comes on the heels of the month of April, Alcohol Awareness Month. This past Tuesday, April 28th, at the JUF's annual Jewish Day School night, our colleague Dr. Beth Fishman of the Jewish Center for Addiction introduced Dr. David Polkovitz of Yeshiva University, who spoke about substance abuse, how to talk to children of all ages. A number of acknowledgments are in order. We thank our hosts, Joni Krauns, Director of the Virginia Frank Child Development Center, and the CDC team. Thank you, Joni. And Joni and her team have hosted us for all 5 of our forums. Our presenters who have agreed to share their insights and their experiences: Sabrina Townsend and the Continuous Quality Improvement Department of JCFS, Amy Rubin, Senior Director of Community Services at JCFS. The core of our morning's program will be a panel discussion addressing our topic. Following the formal presentations, we will have a question and answer period during which we encourage you to share your own perspectives and experience around the issue of alcohol misuse in the Orthodox community. I will then wrap up the formal part of our program and map out next steps. Our forum will conclude with an opportunity for informal networking. Please note you can see a voice recorder here. We will be voice recording the formal presentations. We will not be recording the Q&A. In a moment, Robin Stein, Director of Response Center, will introduce our panelists. For the next 50 minutes or so, our presenters will discuss the topic of alcohol misuse in the Orthodox community. Robin will moderate the question and answer period following the presentations, and then we will go on, as I said, to informal networking. Thank you, Robin.
Good morning. As Rabbi Rosenberg said, I'm Robin Stein. I'm the Director of Response, which is an adolescent program of Jewish Child and Family Services. And I am so pleased to be with all of you this morning to introduce our panelists and moderate the panel discussion. Without further ado, Rabbi Shaanan Gelman is the Rabbi at Kehilat Chovevei Zion in Skokie. Rabbi Gelman was born in Buffalo, New York, and grew up in the Bronx. He earned a bachelor's in computer science at Yeshiva University and smicha from Yeshiva University's Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary. He spent 3 years studying in Israel and was a Kollel Fellow in the Boca Raton Community Kollel. Rabbi Gelman is a member of the Rabbinical Council of America and serves on the executive board. He is an active member of the Chicago Rabbinical Council, as well as serving on the board of the Associated Talmud Torahs of Chicago. Yankie Greenberger is the clinical director of Madraigos Midwest, an organization that supports and enhances the emotional, social, and spiritual health of adolescents, young adults, and their families with an array of innovative prevention and intervention programs and services. Yankie received his master's in social work from Wilder School of Social Work and is currently a licensed clinical social worker. At Madraigos, he is responsible for the oversight of clinical and programming services, including assessing and evaluating cases of teens and young adults, providing support, referrals, case management, prevention programs, and crisis intervention. Bringing a unique perspective of recovery through Jewish tradition, Dr. Beth Fishman has worked with individuals and families impacted by substance use and disorders and other addictive behaviors for over 20 years. As the manager of the Jewish Center of Addiction at JCFS, Dr. Fishman facilitates Jewish 12-stepping workshops and teaches Jewish spiritual practices that enhance sobriety. She trains and consults with clinicians, educates the Jewish community on addiction prevention and treatment, and assists Jewish clergy and communal professionals in recognizing and supporting individuals impacted by addictive behavior. Dr. Fishman is a clinical psychologist licensed by the state of Illinois. Becky Jacobson is a Chicago area native, a graduate of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Becky received her Bachelor of Science in Human Development and Family Studies. Then attended the Jane Addams College of Social Work, where she earned her MSW. During her time at Jane Addams, Becky worked with teenagers at a local public high school as well as adults with dual diagnoses. Becky joined Jewish Child and Family Services in 2012, working with individuals with developmental disabilities and their families. Becky brings her experience in program development, community outreach, and extensive work within the Jewish community to her role as outreach prevention specialist for the Jewish Center for Addiction and Response. Becky is implementing Partners in Prevention program, a substance abuse prevention program for Jewish youth in synagogues, Jewish day school, and Jewish summer camps. Okay, so we have each presenter to be able to speak for about 10 minutes on the topic of alcohol misuse in the Orthodox community. And some of the things that our panelists will be covering today will be trends concerning alcohol misuse, what they may be seeing in the community, identifying some of the prevention efforts as well as any potential solutions. What are the areas of concern that are most pressing, especially looking at the future of alcohol misuse in the Orthodox community? Are there some successes that we can point to in terms of communal efforts to minimize alcohol misuse? Okay, and I'd like to ask Rabbi Gelman to open today's presentation.
Thank you, Robin. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Rosenberg. I just want to say as a primer to what I'm about to share is that I don't consider myself an expert on this. I was honored to participate in a conversation. There are people in this room, many people in this room I recognize who have far greater expertise in these areas than myself. I'm just one Rav of one shul with one set of experiences. And to the extent that my perspective and my experiences are helpful for a conversation, that's great. I'd be interested to hear what everyone else has to say as well. So I'll start by referencing, I'm framing the conversation from a Torah perspective. That's what we rabbis like to do. That's our stall tactic here. And as Rabbi Rosenberg began, the role of alcohol in particular within the Torah, within our tradition, and understanding that as it's defined within the Torah, the role it serves is also very interesting because that will frame the dilemma that we are presented with within our communal observances in our synagogues and Jewish organizations. We just read the parsha of Acharei Mot Kedoshim, and according to one of the approaches of the Chazal, Nadav Avihu, or the sons of Aaron, who willingly, if you're familiar with the story, then forgive the repetition, but willingly offer what is called an Eish Zara, a strange fire. They present a ketoret, an incense, before the Holy of Holies, before the Almighty. And as they approach, they are scorched up and they are instantly killed on the spot. This is a source of great grief, of course, for for the father, for Aaron. It's the day of the completion of the Miluim, the Mishkan, and it's considered a very, very painful moment, obviously, for any parent, particularly the circumstances that were happening at that moment. The sages struggled terribly with this because the Torah does not present us with a very clear description of what exactly they did wrong. One approach in our sages is that they were missing the appropriate clothing, they weren't properly dressed, they weren't married, and they were supposed to be married. They left eligible bachelorettes available, and they did not marry them. That's a separate discussion about agunot, which can be brought up from there. One of the approaches, one of the common approaches, is that shasu yayin, and there's a juxtaposition in the parshiot between this story of Nadav and Avihu dying and the prohibition of Kohanim to enter into the temple service while drunk. Because of that, the sages suggested that they were drunk when they entered in to offer the Ketoret. Already we understand that to try to do something of Kedusha, of holiness, in an inebriated state, is not really a possible combination. In general, intoxication, I think, is viewed as the antithesis of spiritual wellness. Adam and Chava, the first sin that we have recorded in the Torah, the sin that got us all started in this whole rebellious thing against God, is, according to one approach in the sages, taking a fruit. And what is that fruit? There are different opinions, and one of the opinions happens to be it's the grape. And so we see already there's an association between the grape, between drunkenness, between alcohol and rebelliousness from God. That a person who is not in his right mind is distanced from God. We understand why this is the case, of course, right? When we have our mental faculties with us, we can be aware, we can be sensitive to that which is around us, and we can have a connection to something that is higher than us. To succumb to alcohol is to admit that we are nothing more than animals in that sense. It's to embrace our animalistic side. And in that sense, it is the opposite of spiritual wellness. Noach, as Rosenberg pointed out, the most righteous man of his generation, who was once an Ish Tzaddik, is later dubbed an Ish Adama, a man of the earth. He experiences this moral descent when he leaves the ark and he realizes his world has fallen apart, has crumbled around him. And he walks out, and obviously this would take many years to plant a vineyard to be able to produce enough grapes so they could produce enough wine to get drunk. This is a number of years had gone by, but the verse describes it as if it happened within an instant, right? As if that was a visceral response to emerging into a world that had so crumbled at his feet, and his pain, his frustration, his fears, his anxiety, perhaps his sense of guilt got the best of him. And the verse describes as if in a moment he becomes drunk, intoxicated, and there he is lying undressed on the floor of his tent. And this experience is the response to his own suffering, his own internal pain. And so he becomes from a righteous man to an Ish Adama. Again, moral descent is associated with drinking of alcohol. Lot, of course, after leaving Sodom, his world is gone. His world is crumbled as well. He becomes drunk, and as a result of the seduction of his own daughters, who thought their world was gone, and is convinced to procreate with his own daughters. And as a result, those two nations, Moab and Ammon, are produced. This is also a story of a person who does something improper as a result of alcohol. Again, there's more to the circumstance. We have to understand the psychology behind it. But I think what the Torah is describing is a similar case in Lot, as Noach, as well as the story of Adam and Chava, are people who respond to less than optimal circumstances by diving into a substance, which is to allow them to forget their pain and their suffering. The Nazir, who's considered the epitome of spiritual advancement, a person who accepts upon himself or herself a spiritual advancement in their life. They want to be aloof. They want to be better than the average person. The main way to accomplish this is to avoid the consumption of wine. Also worthy of note is that so as we say, drinking here has an association with a solution to depression, a solution to human frailty, or response to the human frailty. On the one hand, so much of our ritual, I think, revolves around the use of alcohol as well, and that is Kiddush, Havdalah, benching, Bris Milah, we bring out a cup of wine. The night of the Seder, 4 cups of wine. Purim, of course, and then the associated times that are not necessarily mandated in Jewish law or tradition, but people bring out alcohol anyway, Simchat Torah and other celebrations, Shalom Zachar and the like. Wine and alcoholic beverages have play a prominent role in not just our cultural element, but also achieving a level of Kedusha. You cannot sanctify the day of Shabbat without a cup of wine. Right? You cannot distinguish between the sanctity of Shabbos and after Shabbos without a cup of wine. As the way we establish levels of kedusha is not by avoiding alcohol, but by engaging in consumption of alcohol. And so already, Jewish law, Jewish tradition sets up this conflict for us. On the one hand, it is that which causes our moral descent. On the other hand, it is that which causes our moral elevation. It's a very, very strange dynamic. Also alluded to, Yain Yisamach Levav Anosh. It's considered a positive response to depression. Wine gladdens the heart of mankind who is sad, who is depressed. And that's not said as a negative aspect. It's considered something that might be even an appropriate outlet. And so we have these not just halachic discussions, but we also have this philosophical debate in terms of the role of alcohol and what it does to us. The concept of, which stems from the temple service, Ein simcha ela bebasar v'yayin. There is no joy without meat and wine. Right? Meat is a later addition. The wine is an initial component of that, according to the Rambam, the Maimonides, that wine, which is based on the libations in the temple, we cannot achieve real joy on the holiday without wine. Right? The halachists provide a protocol. Buy candy and nash for your children. Make sure the man buys his wife a nice dress or nice shoes. And the man should receive alcohol. I mean, that's really the way in which we engage in joy. And so this is a very, very tough thing when you have tradition, years of tradition, halacha pulling at us in one direction, and that our knowledge, our seichel, and our experiences with alcohol are telling us the opposite. And so what do we do? And there's also a cultural element, and this is where we get into the shuls. Culturally, the l'chaim has become part of what it means to belong to the club and the shul. People who lack the appropriate language, the lexicon to be able to communicate with one another, they communicate with the l'chaim. Right? You find those who sometimes are more rough around the edges, those who are not well versed in the art of human communication, but they're very good at putting their arm around their fellow, and it's usually men, but now more and more women as well in the shuls, who are engaging in alcohol consumption as a means of social equity. Shalom Zachars, which again we said was not part of the ritual, but it's what you do. It's expected. I remember Rabbi Brander in Boca, he walked into a Shalom Zachar one time and there were beer bottles stacked to the ceiling, and he had experienced so many negative things in his community that he was furious. And he said, that's it, we have to get rid of this. This is just destroying the culture of what it means to welcome to a new child into the world. The way we welcome a new child into the world is by just drowning ourselves in alcohol. That's the introduction into the world. And for those who say that the Shalom Zachar is a tradition to mourn the loss of Torah, well, no better way to mourn than to indulge in the physical like that. I recall the shuls in the Bronx. Growing up, I grew up in unique couple of shuls where it's mostly Holocaust survivors, and then I was the only young person. So I got to daven for the Amud often. Those great experiences. But also, their attitude was a little different. It didn't seem like they were attached to alcohol, but it was certainly part of the culture there. You'd go to Minyan in the morning, and then you'd have a piece of kecho and a cup of whiskey. That's the way you started your day. Many people who grew up in shuls like that know it doesn't make sense to start your day any other way. That's just the way you do it. There's also now a new element that I'm finding, and that is the obsession, the materialism. There is sort of, it used to be also the old Jews in the Bronx, they would give you a lousy cup of whiskey, right? But now it's like...
So if it's bad whiskey, it's okay?
Well, it speaks to the psychology of what's going on here, because now people are showing up, and there's the oohs and the ahs when you bring out a very fine bottle of whiskey, a certain age, a certain brand, the debates, and people have become very intrigued and interested in halacha all of a sudden about sherry cask. People who've never had a halachic discussion about anything in kashrus, all of a sudden, ooh, this is really exciting. I want to hear a shir about this. And the CRC lists and all this stuff. It's very exciting because there's something about status symbol. A New York Times article, what was it, a New York Times article about the kiddushes in the Hamptons? And the obsession over the herring, and it was the Wall Street Journal maybe, the obsession over the types of herring and the alcohol, it's now a status symbol. If you could afford the expensive bottle of wine, you are an important person. And so that's, and I'm guilty of this as well, perhaps, shuls having beer tasting, wine tasting, whiskey tasting as activities. They may have replaced the very immoral and the commonplace occurrence of the program where you have casino night, but now every shul has multiple events that not just have alcohol present, but revolve around alcohol. And I'm saying guilty as charged, involved in this as well, to bring people in. Hopefully we accomplish more good than bad, but that's part of the culture. And then, of course, there's the famous Kiddush Club, which is in the shuls. Now, Kiddush clubs are not necessarily something that's formalized, although there was a well-known rabbi who passed away now, who was not only an active participant in his Kiddush Club, but the founder of his Kiddush Club, I know. And he's a very fine man. And so sometimes you do have the shul working towards it, but usually it's something that kind of shuls look the other way because powerful or well involved, or very involved, or very wealthy individuals are involved in it. I'll share with you some of my experiences in what we did with the Kiddush Club, and what we didn't do with it in a few moments. But that's also part of it. And here's one anecdote. When I came to Skokie, so everyone always says, "What's your first shaila as a rav?" There's a great anecdote like this, by the way, in Tales Out of Shul by Rabbi Manuel Feldman about his first shaila and how surprised he was after poring over the origins of Yoredeya and other areas of halacha, how his very first question had to do with what's the Hebrew name for Nicholas. It's a famous story. You can read it.
Rabbi, explain what shaila is.
Shaila is a halachic inquiry. And if you spend 4 years plus studying Torah intensely, a rabbi is always wondering what's his first question going to be. What's how are they going to test my scholarship, my mastery of the ancient sources? And his first question was, what's the Hebrew name for Nicholas? So my first question, my first really tough question was I arrived, and the question was, we had a keg last year in another shul where we used to live for Simchas Torah. We'd like to bring a keg to Simchas Torah. Now, first I had to figure out what a keg was. I went to YU. We not really drinking school. It's a very large container of beer, and usually at frat parties you'll take some sort of tube and you'll insert it at the bottom of the keg and you'll drink it and it'll be part of the debauchery in general and the conduct of frat parties. They wanted to bring a keg to Simchas Torah. Now it would have been very easy just to say sorry, no. And probably, now after more years of experience and more clout with the tzibor, I could easily do that because it's just inappropriate. But it struck me that this question was really a critical one for me because they wanted to know not just about my halachic approach, but they wanted to know is what kind of, am I going to be their friend, am I a cool rabbi, or am I going to be the strong rabbi who takes a stand against them? And whether it was the right answer or not, this is what Siyata Dishmaya, God stepped in and helped out. Here's what I said. I said, a keg is a very ugly kind of thing, right? It looks like a crazy wild party. To me, it just I'm not saying it's alcohol in general is like that. I'm just saying this looks really bad to me. But you have the sukkah, and you're done using the sukkah on Simchas Torah. We're done with it. We leave the sukkah. We have the shul sukkah, put the keg in the sukkah, put it on a table, and buy glasses, and take them to the mikveh. You have to tovel glass in the mikveh. And it should be a more refined experience. There should be a pourer, and everybody should have one glass, and no more. And you could have in the sukkah, and you can't take out of the sukkah. And they said, okay, well, that sounds great. So a storm came and blew down the sukkah. So someone in the shul came to me and said, well, what do we do now? I said, well, that was the rule in the sukkah. You can't be in the sukkah now. And they accepted it. And that's the way it worked out. And the truth is, I lucked out. I don't know if it was the right answer or the wrong answer, but it occurred to me that people tend to associate alcohol with some sort of class or status symbol, and to elevate the status of these things, to make someone, you have to be a mensch, even if you're engaged in shul in any way, that's a very, very important criteria. Let's try to talk about, just for a couple minutes, I don't know how much time I have, 5 minutes left?
Maybe 3?
3 minutes, okay. Okay, so alternatives. So already the post can talk about, the halachic deciders talk about using grape juice for different rituals. It's interesting, Rabbi Twersky famously counseled a priest, Rabbi Abraham Twersky, and the priest was struggling with alcohol, and the story goes that he said to why don't you use, at your rituals, instead of wine, why don't you use grape juice? I don't know if he assisted in the Avodah Zarah process as well, but why don't you use grape juice in addition? But so he said, it's a good question. And he cited that one of our great halachic deciders, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, of blessed memory, allowed for it. And so he looked into it with his halachic experts, his legal experts, and they approved it as well. Having an alternative, if you're not going to ban it altogether, when people go to Kiddush, right, there should be grape juice present as well. People should feel that they don't lose their status symbol of being part of a club, but they have an alternative. Some people want to say, well, we should alcohol-free shuls. That's an approach. I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet, because I'm not sure that I'm ready to pin the entire problem on the substance, but rather the real emptiness and void that drives people to drink and use it in an appropriate way. But that's my approach, and experts might think differently. We also have to identify triggers. For some people, someone who struggles with alcoholism in my community told me that walking into shul on a weekly basis is a frightening experience. Could you imagine the one place that draws you to God is the one place that draws you away from God? And they told me every week they struggled. And their solution might have been one way, and other solution, they stayed close with the friends and with those things, but found an alternative. Other people, it pushes them very far away. We have an obligation, don't put a stumbling block before a blind person. The classic example of this, ironically, is a nazir, a person who vows not to drink any wine. We're not supposed to reach them a cup of wine or make it available to them. If wine is on one side of the river and they're on the other side of the river, you're not supposed to build a bridge for them to be able to access the other side. To be able to provide that item that they so crave is a dangerous thing. Another approach, I think, and this to me talks a great deal, and with this I'll end. If you're familiar with this book, it's fantastic. Familiar with this book? It's called God of Our Understanding by Rabbi Taub, Jewish Spirituality and Recovery from Addiction. This is amazing, and just in counseling and helping people and helping yourself understand addiction and the addictions we all struggle with. He talks about the spiritual model, and he says there was a man by the name of Roland Hazard, who was born in 1881, who one of the people he was seeing for his alcohol addiction, he was seeing Carl Jung. And Carl Jung said he had never seen anyone with such an addiction. He felt he almost couldn't help him. The only thing they started to find therapy was with spiritual indulgence, kind of jumping into the spiritual side. This guy later on had an acquaintance. They formed an Oxford group and another semi-religious group. They ended up meeting another friend, and eventually it was Bill. I'm blanking on the name. What's his last name? Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson. Well, it's not. Bill Wilson is not really him, but he was one of the acquaintances, and they started Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the principles was bringing God into the equation, or this higher power. And what this speaks of, I think, is that there is a thirst. People who succumb to alcohol, and any addiction for that matter, are thirsty people. And what Rabbi Taub finds is that he goes to a room, gives a presentation. It could be, no applause, empty reception, and then he goes into a room of addicts or recovering addicts, and they're so thirsty and eager to hear what he has to say. It's the same presentation. And one time he had two presentations in a row. One was before addicts and one was before non-addicts, and there was a thirst to hear what he had to say. Why? He says he believes that when you are an addict, you are predisposed, you have a predisposition for thirst for godliness. And when that's not filled with godliness, when it's not filled with genuine spirituality, you will try to fill the void with any quick high that you can get at that very moment. And so it's not just an escape. It's not just, okay, don't indulge in this addiction. Don't have coffee, have decaf. It's not a decaf. Judaism is not an escape from another addiction. It is the real thing that people are yearning for. Not just Judaism, it's spirituality. People are looking for spirituality. And when they don't have genuine spirituality, they're going to look for other things. If you're predisposed for that thirst, for that hole in your heart, as Rabbi David Aaron says, that God-sized hole in your heart, if you don't fill it up with God, you're going to need to fill it up with other things. That cholat ahava, as it says in Song of Songs. We are lovesick for God. And so I think synagogues, instead of just throwing the easy answer at it, is to say, okay, alcohol-free, which might be a solution. But that's not really addressing the real issue. The real issue is how do we make our synagogues, our communities, our schools spiritual havens, where children or teens or adults who are yearning for God can really fill that God-sized hole with spirituality, as opposed to with the empty quick high that doesn't get them anywhere but trouble.
Rabbi Gelman, thank you so much for painting such it's such a vibrant story of the complexities of this issue. Yankie?
All right. So, we're right now in a period of mourning. This period between Pesach and Shavuos, Passover, and the upcoming holiday of Shavuos. And the reason we're in the mourning, it's understood from the Talmud that because there was a lack of respect or care for one another. So with this period of mourning, we don't listen to music, we don't make weddings, many people don't shave. If we would have done this next week, because it ends, I won't, we would have done this next week, it would have looked a little bit better. So there are things we do to commemorate this period of mourning, but it's also a time of reflection of how we can be more selfless and how we could be more thoughtful of the other person. So I feel very blessed and privileged to have this opportunity to be as part and joining the Orthodox network. Thank you for the invitations, and Mrs. Friedman also, Rabbi Rosenberg, and Robin. So because we're able to collaborate together and think how we can improve the lives of our families and our communities. So thank you for this opportunity. So I want to respectfully suggest a different title for this for this speech or this presentation. So I think the title is Alcohol Misuse, and I have a hard time with understanding what misuse is. With addiction and dependency, abuse, we can understand, we can see that, we can figure that out. There's even a diagnostic tool for that. But when it comes to misuse, there's room for debate, semantics, and it's not clear. So I think that the discussion that needs to be had is alcohol responsibility in the Jewish community and in the Orthodox community. And I think I'd like to focus, from my perspective and my capacity with Madraigos, working with kids and understanding how kids view this, to share some of these thoughts. A couple of years ago, Rabbi Bender, who is the dean of one of the larger Jewish educational systems, probably in America, called Yeshiva Darkei Torah in Far Rockaway, New York, he put out a letter on to some of the Jewish websites, and he talked about alcohol abuse in the Frum community. And he made a couple of points that I wanted to share. He said in his 35 years in his work in chinuch and his work in education, he's never seen, and he used the word hefkerus. Not sure the right word. So total disregard, I think in the world of addiction, it's self-will run riot, right? I think that's how the term is. But it's total disregard for the norms of alcohol. And the second thing he says, again, he said a few other things in there, but one of the other things he says is that unequivocally, kids who develop abuse of alcohol and drugs come from environments where the home is a place where alcohol is viewed as something very important, where the shuls have where alcohol has a central role in these shuls. And he says the schools can't fix this. Schools can only reinforce the character development of how parents raise their kids. And I think the same is true also with community organizations. I think we are in a position to support and enhance based off of the character development that the kids are getting from home. So I think the bottom line and the pressing issue that we need to talk about is the type of relationship we have as a community with alcohol, and what messages the kids are getting with regard to alcohol's role in our life, in our religion, and in our spirituality. The damage caused by alcohol irresponsibility is terrible, and if you think about this from a loved one's perspective, think about it from a kid's perspective. Let's say there's a bar or bat mitzvah, and by the kiddush after davening, one of the parents will blame the father. Right? The father gets totally drunk. So, what's it like for that kid, that bar mitzvah, to see his father drunk by that simcha? First of all, on a very selfish level, the focus is supposed to be on the bar or bat mitzvah, not on the drunk father. And on a deeper level, it's embarrassing. So here the kid won't coming to share in the simcha, and it's a very embarrassing moment for the kid. What about a husband who comes home drunk from shul, and he's unable to help the wife? First of all, that's super selfish, very selfish. Second, the wife, and there's a lot of women in this room, so maybe you can identify, will give that look to the father, right? And the kids see that look. So what's the message that the kid is getting about the stability in their home when the father's coming home, even if it happens one time, but certainly if it happens often, about the stability in the home when a father comes home drunk. And we have a lot of opportunities for inspirational and spiritual events, whether it's a kumsitz, get together and sing, an oneg, to celebrate the beauty of Shabbos or Yantiv. And there's always alcohol there. It's I'll get into whether it's good or bad. I don't know if it's totally bad, but there's alcohol there. But when alcohol is playing the central role, like Rabbi Gelman was saying, when it's playing the central role, what's the message to the teens? That we can't enhance our spirituality, we can't find our inner happiness and our inner strength without an aid. We can't elevate our souls without a drink. Think about how messed up is it that kids learn from a young age that in order to achieve ruchnius and spirituality, we need to drink. So we have to begin to accept that there's a message about alcohol in the community, and our children are getting this, and it's not a healthy one. And the truth is, it's not just with alcohol, it's now moving down to marijuana, prescription medication, but that's a different discussion. So once we're able to accept the message about alcohol and its role, we can begin to shift from this mindset of glorification to a more realization perspective. So just looking at glorification real quick, and we'll move to see some ideas of maybe how we can implement efforts to be more responsible about our message. So the home is the primary source of a child's attitude with regard to alcohol. Research shows, and I tried to find the study before I came here, I couldn't find it, but I've seen it before. So if I say research shows, of course, obviously, right? So research shows that model drinking in the home, appropriate social drinking, results in less alcoholism in children when they grow up than zero drinking in the home. So there's something to modeling what it means to drink, what it means to have a drink, and the type of setting you're having that drink in. What's your attitude towards drinking? But when alcohol has a central role in everything, then the message will be unhealthy. So think of it, the message can be very subtle. So think about this subtle message. One adult saying to another adult, and again, very subtle. Let's grab a couple of beers, go back and chill, or talk, or relax. So a kid who hears this is, okay, I want to chill. So there are two steps to this process I just heard. I need to grab a couple of beers and go out back. It's very subtle. It's a very subtle message, but when alcohol plays that primary role, that's a message that's getting it to something that Rabbi Gelman was talking about, a more direct message. When the triple reserve 25-year-old oak cask, maybe even sherry cask if it works in the halakha, right? And all the oohs and ahs come out, and everyone's clamoring for even a little taste of it. So that's a little bit more direct of a message where we give respect to alcohol. The next place that children receive this message is in shul. And this doesn't only mean the physical confines of the shul. I think it's also the shalom zachars of a shul member, a simcha of a shul member, whether it's a wedding or a bar mitzvah or any other event. An oneg that's either at a member's house or even at one of at the rabbi's house. But there's certainly something to making a l'chaim, like Rabbi Gelman said. There is something to making a l'chaim, and I'm not advocating for a totally dry shul. There's something in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, to be able to make a l'chaim, to be able to have a drink. But it needs to be controlled. It needs to be controlled. I think about two things. When I think about shul's role in alcohol, I think about two stories that always come to mind. There's a custom on Simchas Torah where every honor is sold, right? And whether it's the different being called up to for a reading of the Torah portion, or whether it's there's a whole slew of different honorees. It's the custom in the shuls to sell all these liaison, and then shuls take it further as part of their fundraiser. They sell different things, tissue boxes. Who gets to buy the tissue boxes for the shul? Who gets to be the candy man for the shul? So I was in one shul where they sold kiddush for after davening. Who was able to make kiddush for the shul after davening? But here's the catch: kiddush had to be made on a cup, on a kos of whiskey. And that was one of the highest sold items of the day, right? And then there's a whole to do when the person actually made the kiddush. You had to drink it in one. It was disgusting. But what about, again, the kid sitting there looking at this? What's the message that he's getting? The other story that I think about is there was this big kiddush once, in a tent outside of shul. And I remember looking and seeing one guy, for some reason he caught my eye, and he took one drink, and then he took another drink, and then he took the glass. I mean, this was a real kiddush. They had glass. It was, not the plastic glass, but the real glass. And he took the glass after his second drink, and he threw it against the wall of the shul, the outside wall of the shul. Maybe he would have done it on the inside shul wall also. And I'm looking at it, it looked, when you see they take champagne and they throw it into the fireplace. That's what it looked like. And I remember the glass splattered everyone. Everyone just went about their business, as if it didn't happen. Now again, what's the message that the kid is seeing there? And the success of a kiddush can't be determined by the amount, the quantity, and the quality of what's being of alcohol at the kiddush. Again, always come back to what's the message the kids are getting. I remember speaking with one person. He was describing when he was younger, he was a very shy, timid person, he lacked confidence. But he always noticed in shul, by the kiddush, that people were happy. People seemed to be having a really good time. And they would drink, and they'd make a joke. They'd sing, it would be beautiful. And they'd drink, and they'd just... He viewed it, he described it as, that's how I always want to feel. That's how I always wanted to feel. So he decided, you know what? The way you must get there is through alcohol. So at 11 years old, he started drinking. At 11 years old, this kid who saw this in shul started drinking. And he didn't stop until he was 27 years old, divorced, with kids, homeless, and doing cocaine. Kiddush clubs, a little rescue. Kiddush clubs have no place in shul. Kiddush club, there's no grounds to having a Kiddush club in shul, and it needs to stop. And if people are going to leave the shul because of it, so be it. I was going to say something about another Navi here, but Rabbi Gelman. Rabbi Gelman stole my thunder. So how can we change our message about what alcohol is? So in my opinion, it starts with the leadership of the community, and in the Orthodox world, the leadership are Rabbanim, and I say this with respect and reverence. So please understand that I'm saying this with respect and reverence, because the Rabbanim are the people, the rabbis are the people that guide us. So Rabbanim need to speak about the responsibility parents have with regard to alcohol. They need to be able to identify and spot and talk about what they see as irresponsibility. They have to be able to name it. And the Rabbanim need to be the driving forces in establishing policies and protocols so we can safeguard the pitfalls of glorifying. It probably in a lot of shuls will be an unpopular or risky move, but the Rav has the power of influence, and if the Rav is speaking about it, there will be a father and a mother listening, and they can take home that message, and they can start changing their views and their message that they're giving to their children. Rabbi Bender says in that letter I mentioned before that the parents, that he wants parents to demand change from their friends. I think that if we can change the culture, the alcohol culture, to one which requires responsibility, we won't need to make these demands from our friends. And yeah, there'll be those that don't listen, and they'll need other interventions. So, but there are things that are being put forth. I know in the shul that I daven in, there are two, three people that hold a bottle of whiskey all the time, and they offer people a l'chaim, and if someone says yes, they pour them a l'chaim. If someone says no, they move on. There was a kiddush this past Shabbos. It was a beautiful kiddush, really nice bar mitzvah, beautiful. And you know what the focal point of that kiddush was? It was the simcha. It was the family. It was the people coming to wish Mazel Tov, not the people, competing with who can drink more. Not the drunk kid outside in the lobby. It was the simcha. It was the family. So we need to maintain perspective. Alcohol does, like Rabbi Gelman was saying, alcohol does have its role in Judaism, and we need to make sure that our children can clearly understand that role. I'm just going to skip a little bit. All right. So, I'm just with what has been done already, just in terms of Madraigos. So, I think that the way I view Madraigos, I've always viewed Madraigos is that we rarely, if ever, do anything that's not asked of us to do, and that's the same when it comes to the kids that get involved in our programs in our organization. But when we are asked to help out, we do it in a very real and a very open and a very honest way. And we work with kids, and to be effective with working with kids, you have to be real, open, and honest. Recently we ran a group in one of the schools, and the topic came to alcohol and drugs. And I could have gone in there with research and again, if I would have said research, they would have believed me. Statistics, scary videos, scary stories. But research also shows that knowing research doesn't change behavior. So I decided to ask them what they thought about drugs, what they thought about alcohol. And we were able to have a very real, open, and honest dialogue about their rationalizations about why certain things are okay, why certain things are not okay. But they were also able to express their concerns and their fears about what it may about drugs and alcohol. Will 0% of them ever make a poor choice? Probably not. I wouldn't be honest and real, and if I told you, yeah, they're all good. But we were able to have a dialogue with them. We were able to be a voice of reason, because there is this confusing message that's out there, and I think we were able to be that voice of reason for them. And how do I know? Because kids came over to me afterwards to ask questions about different things that struck chords. And we were able to address some of the concerns that they needed. And this is with teenagers. We need to be real, open, and honest with the adults, and we need to do it for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beth?
It's a real honor to be on this panel with Rabbi Gelman and Yankie. Your point is very well taken about thinking of alcohol responsibility. I do think it's helpful, being a clinical psychologist and being the manager of the Center for Addiction, to talk a little bit about what alcohol misuse actually on the ground in real life looks like, what we're talking about. So I think it's helpful just to know, in the most basic sense possible, that alcohol misuse is the use of alcohol when negative consequences result, and then one continues to use. When we go into addiction, it's a much broader definition, but I think fundamentally this is what we're looking for. People who use, people who drink, and problems in their life arise. And those problems can be school and work related, they can be relationship related, they can be spiritual in nature, they can certainly be physical in nature. Alcohol is one of the most potent toxins to the body, and I think people don't think of it that way because it's legal. And they would think that any illegal or illicit drug is more toxic to the body than alcohol, but alcohol actually impacts more organ systems than most other drugs now, and is very, very dangerous. As far as trends, Rabbi Gelman already referenced one very important trend. We're seeing across the board that girls and women are drinking more and more. The gap between the drinking of men and women, or girls and boys, is closing, but that's not necessarily because boys and men are drinking less. It's more because girls and women are drinking more. And everybody is starting to drink earlier. And the trend, in particular with teens and young adults, is to binge drink, which is to drink a large quantity of alcohol, which is considered 5 drinks or more in one sitting, which is a very dangerous way to drink because it can lead to alcohol poisoning, etc. So this is another trend that we're seeing. And lastly, a very important trend is that it's very rare these days to see somebody drinking alcohol to the exclusion of using any other drug. So we're seeing polydrug misuse, alcohol being a drug. This is not necessarily true in older adults, but for children up to whatever would be just short of an older adult, sort of there is a true generational issue here. It's very rare to find somebody who's just drinking. Again, and so all of these things, unfortunately, are more dangerous, and they are all happening. I was asked to talk a little bit about the problems that result from alcohol use and the negative consequences. And again, we've already heard some about those. They are so numerous that I'm just going to have to breeze through, but I do want to touch on some that are in particular. Everybody who drinks too much, who is impaired with alcohol, will have impaired judgment. All kinds of accidents will happen, and this is across the lifespan for different reasons. Accidents can happen in particular with older adults because alcohol can impair the mechanism of balance, and if somebody's also taking other medications, which older adults often are, then falling as an accident is very common and very dangerous. Driving under the influence, obviously, creates accidents, not only for the person in the car, unfortunately, but the innocent bystander as well. As I just mentioned, alcohol does impact and compromise most vital organs, the brain, the heart, the liver, the stomach, blood pressure, etc. And then I think it's always important to note that alcohol misuse, certainly addiction, but not necessarily addiction. If we're talking about binge drinking, alcohol misuse can be fatal. We're talking about a very serious issue here because fatalities do result from some of these accidents, but also from increased aggression and fighting when people's judgment is impaired and they're more willing to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do, and they may get into fights, they may use weapons where they wouldn't have otherwise. Domestic violence is highly, highly correlated with alcohol use in the home, and domestic violence also can be fatal, very scary. And I mentioned alcohol poisoning, when the body itself is basically shut down due to the effects of alcohol being a depressant in the body. So the heart rate will slow and the breathing rate will slow, and somebody can die. Problems associated with misuse, specifically in teens and young adults, very important to talk about, although I do think it's important to recognize that in the Jewish community, we really love to talk about our kids because we love our kids. And a lot of the focus of the Jewish community is on our children, educating our children, bringing our children up to be good Jews, to be good people. But it's not just the kids who have a problem with alcohol. However, young people do have specific problems that older adults don't. Now that we're getting pretty good with brain imaging, we're getting a lot better with technology and medical science, we know that the adolescent brain is doing a whole lot of important development. The only other time in one's life that is as active in brain development as in adolescence is when one is still in the womb as a fetus, and then very early on in infancy. So there's a lot of activity going on in brain development very early on, and then there's not like nothing's happening during childhood, but it's just a little quieter. And then during adolescence, there's another blossoming of brain development. So to be introducing a drug, a toxic drug, to the brain at a time when the frontal lobes are developing, which is all about judgment and memory and learning, not such a great choice. And the impact on the brain development of an adolescent under the use of alcohol can be irreparable. So someone who's binge drinking as an adolescent and has an impact on the development of these very important parts of the brain may not recover, and it may impact them for the rest of their lives. So taking some of the steps that Rabbi Gelman and Yankie have talked about within the community are enormously important. I just want to bring a sense of urgency to our discussion because we're talking about a situation that can be fatal or can have lifelong repercussions, can bring IQ down, can impact learning and learning disabilities. More kids will drop out of school and get into trouble with the law. These are all specific to young adults who use. Another really important thing that's going on in adolescence, as we all know because it's very challenging, is that whole social emotional development piece. So during adolescence, young people are testing boundaries. They're sort of trying to figure out who they're going to be for the rest of their lives. And it's a hard time for parenting. It's a hard time for the community as a whole. We try very hard, of course, to embrace and hold and contain these young folks so that they can do that experimentation with their identity safely and grow in a strong and straight way. So if you put alcohol and other drugs in the mix, when somebody is supposed to be learning how to relate in a healthy manner with other people, because that's a big part of what the social emotional development is. How do you resolve conflict between yourself and somebody else? How do you start a conversation with somebody that you've been intimidated by? How do you tone yourself down if others are intimidated by you? So much happens in this social emotional learning. If somebody is drinking during that time, the ability to learn these very important life skills is completely impaired. Drastically impaired. Oftentimes, I will work with an adult, somebody who's 30, 40, 45, 50, who had a history of alcohol or polydrug abuse, finally gotten sober, such a blessing, and they're trying to learn how to relate to people, how to resolve conflict for the first time in their life, because in prior years, they would escape by using and drinking. So suddenly they're doing at 45 what everyone else is doing when they're 15. And it's not pretty. It's very hard to do when you're 45 because ordinarily by that time somebody's married, perhaps divorced, likely has children. Those relationships are probably disrupted in some way if alcohol use has been very heavy. So it's not a nice course over the life to miss those important developmental milestones. They're there for a reason. It's important to learn those things when you're being held by your community as a teen, not so great to learn them after a lifetime of avoidance and then you're 45 and don't know how to resolve conflict. I think it's important to say that use of alcohol is a high predictor, and this is particularly heartbreaking for me, but it's a very high predictor for increased sexual assault on girls and young women. So if our girls and our teens and our young women are drinking more, then they themselves are at increased risk of sexual assault. And it's, what can you say, it's a terrible thing. And our girls need to know that. They need to know that. I'm not saying it's their fault, but they need to know. Yankie did a great job of talking about the impact on families, so I'll just add a couple of other things. If a woman is drinking and she's pregnant, we know from research, some of the most solid research we have and some of the most long-lasting research we have, is that the impact on the fetus is dramatic. Now, of course, women don't necessarily know they're pregnant until they're 6 weeks, 10 weeks pregnant. They're not going to know right away. But that fetus is developing from day one. So if they're drinking, if they have a habit of drinking, if they're binge drinking in particular, if they're young women. And let me say that since drinking among girls, teens, and young women is not as socially acceptable as it is for boys and men, that women, young women, adult women, tend to hide their drinking. They tend to drink alone, drink quietly. So people don't know, so they don't incur the shame. So if a young woman, a young wife, is potentially pregnant simply because she's sexually active in her marriage and has a habit of drinking quietly so nobody knows it, and she's binge drinking, her fetus will be impacted. Her baby will be impacted. And what the research has found, which is horrible and fascinating at the same time, is that certain structures will develop in the fetus on one particular day of the pregnancy. It's amazing what we are able to see now with our technology. So if the woman happens to overdrink on this particular day, this particular organ system, this particular brain structure will be affected. It's one of the really interesting and horrible things about fetal alcohol syndrome, because some children, most children actually, who have fetal alcohol syndrome have a very classic look to their face. And it's one of the ways that health professionals recognize them, because there are certain features of the face that are impacted. However, if for some reason the mother is not drinking during that very narrow period of time when the facial structures are developing, that child will not have the typical facial features of someone with fetal alcohol syndrome. They'll have the intellectual impairment, they'll have the heart defects, but they won't have the facial features because, for whatever reason, the mother didn't start drinking until later, or she took a 2-week break or whatever. So it's enormously important that we understand for families that drinking among women is potentially very, very dangerous for the children. A whole nother point that we really need to talk about more as a community is older adults. Our older adult population is booming, and it's kind of a pun because the boomers are now part of the older adult population, which is booming. We have sort of two populations of older adults happening now. We have the older adults, folks maybe in their 70s, let's say, who have a very different pattern of alcohol use. They may be the ones who were exclusive alcohol users, social drinkers, sort of the Dean Martin idea. And then we have the boomer generation, who is also considered older adults, some of them now, not all, but some, who are coming in with a lifetime of illicit drug use and polydrug use, whole different, very different set of issues. So in our synagogues, in our communities, we now need to be thinking about, how about the older folks among us? What sort of medications are they taking? Are they taking alcohol along with those medications? What are the interactions between them? What might we need to do to safeguard our older adults? What's happening in assisted living facilities? Or if not assisted living, then just housing for older adults, which we have prominently in our community, thank goodness, where there are happy hours every night. And this is very, very common. It's actually one of the selling points to families when they're looking where to place their beloved parents. So there's a happy hour at 5 o'clock every night, downstairs in the lobby. And in one way, one can understand it's an opportunity to socialize, and older adults can become very isolated. So it's a wonderful idea. The concept is terrific. Some way to bring everybody out of their rooms, bring them together to be part of a community. However, let's say 75% of the population there is taking other medications, because these days that's probably a low estimate. A low estimate.
More like 90.
Like that, I didn't want to sound like I'm exaggerating, but yeah. Like a lot. And is anybody monitoring who's drinking how much, considering what other medications they're on? One of the reasons it's so important to think about this with older adults and their medication issues is because of, for example, the incident of falling. I don't think I've ever met an older adult whose independence wasn't precious to them, however they define it. I think those of us who are not yet older adults are getting, it's coming. We don't want to lose our independence. Part of the American dream. It's part of needing to get to the grocery store because you have to drive there because we can't hardly walk anywhere in most of our communities. So being independent is enormously important, and the more that one drinks as an older adult, the less likely one is able to maintain one's level of independence, to stay in one's home, because one is more likely to fall or to have other issues, nutritional issues, etc., with their other medications. So we need to have a look within our synagogue communities at the older adults in particular. I don't know if any of you were at the JUF Day School night where Dr. Pelkovitz spoke. What an amazing individual he is. I was so honored to introduce him and honored to meet him. He said something that when you hear something somebody says, that's something I need to remember. He said, the eye sees what the mind knows. In other words, if you don't believe something's possible, when it walks right by you, when it walks right in front of you, you won't recognize it, because it's not a possibility. It's just sort of how our psyche works. So you have to believe that something's possible in order to recognize it. So one of the most important things we can do in prevention and intervention in the Jewish community is to educate ourselves and raise the awareness of alcohol misuse, alcoholism as a Jewish issue. Because if we continue to believe, if any part of our community continues to believe that Jews just don't drink to excess, those are, the Irish do that, and the Native Americans have a problem with that. Sadly, those are both true, but that doesn't exclude us from having a problem also. If we don't recognize it in our psyche, if we don't believe it's possible, then we won't recognize it as it's walking down the street in front of us. If we don't recognize an individual early on as having trouble because we don't believe it's possible, then their misuse will most likely increase. And the longer a pattern of misuse goes on, the more possible fatality becomes. So it's a matter of life or death that our community become educated and aware, know how to recognize the symptoms of somebody who is having negative consequences, and know what to do so we can save their life and preferably, hopefully, save the life of their family. I'll just make a couple more comments. What challenges are there within the Orthodox community? We've heard many. I'd like to add a couple. One thing that I don't often hear addressed, but I think should probably be part of the discussion, is that certain parts of tradition within the Orthodox community are actually contradicting federal, state, and local law. And in particular, I'm talking about underage drinking. There's a fair amount of underage drinking that's happening in the Orthodox community. Maybe there is no legal consequence. Maybe it's rarely that there's a legal consequence. Perhaps in the not Orthodox community, there are more typical legal consequences because that's how the police interact with the community that is not Orthodox. However, it's still the case that underage drinking is tolerated in some portions of the Orthodox community and is simply illegal. It should be part of the conversation when a shul is thinking about their policies and their procedures around alcohol use. I don't know that this has been mentioned yet. If it has, forgive me. But it almost goes without saying, so if it hasn't yet, it's because I think it goes without saying. The shame and the stigma of admitting to alcoholism within the family is terrible. And within the Jewish community, it's terrible. And has very specific negative consequences within the Orthodox community in particular, because the family can be branded, in a sense, as being bad. And it's not just with alcohol use, but it can be with other mental health disorders. And who would want to marry into a family where there's alcoholism? So a shidduch can be a problem. This issue is something that I'm not at all qualified to touch, but just to bring it up and to say, what is there to do about this? How can we make it okay for people to come forward and ask for help without bringing shame upon their entire family and having consequences unto the seventh generation? And lastly, I'd like to say, as far as challenges within the community, I've worked with the social workers at the Associated Talmud Torah, an amazing, wonderful group of professionals. But oftentimes they're caught between a rock and a hard place because they know what's happening with the students on the ground. Because the students thankfully come to them and talk to them and share their experiences, need help, etc. Yet, those same social workers are not allowed, so to speak, are not supported, let's say, by the school administration, by the community as a whole, in giving basic alcohol education to the kids, giving basic prevention skills in the schools, because there's an understandable desire to protect children from the general culture, which is saturated with alcohol and other drugs. Yet, we know that the kids are using, we know that the kids are exposed, so the social workers are caught in a very tough situation, and I think we need very much to help them out of between the rock and the hard place so that they're able to fully do their job and fully support these children and fully support the families, because it's not just the kids using who come and talk to them. They come to talk to the social workers about their parents who are using. There's amazing education that can be done with children living with alcoholic parents that can be profoundly impactful on the rest of that child's life. They can learn how to take care of themselves even if their parent continues to drink. They can learn how to stay safe in that home even if their parent continues to drink. they can learn that they're not the only one whose parents continue to drink. It's one of the best ways to prevent alcoholism with those kids who are at very high risk, is to intervene with them when their kid's still living in that home, regardless of if the parent continues to use or not. If the social workers in the schools are empowered to have those groups, to bring those kids together, to teach them how to be safe, to teach them how to take care of themselves regardless of what the parent does, we are doing a wonderful job of prevention for future alcoholism for the kids. I have lots and lots more to say, but I'm not going to say it. The only thing I will say is that I'm so thrilled, Rabbi Gelman, that you brought God of Our Understanding, an amazing, amazing book. And the Jewish Center for Addiction is very fortunate to be very generously supported by the Fund for Innovation and Health, which is a federation granting program. And one of the things that we can offer to Jewish communal organizations are books like this. So if you, in your school, in your synagogue, in whatever organization that you're a part of, would like to have this book or others, the Big Book of AA, there are several books that I can recommend that would be appropriate for your setting. We would be more than happy to supply those books to you. I just need to know that you want them. So I also have them in our library at the JCA. If you'd like to borrow them and have a look at them and see if you feel it would be helpful or appropriate to your setting, give me a call, let me know, and I'll send them through the courier or however we get them to you. And we can go about it that way as well. Thank you.
And thank you so much for ending on the
Absolutely, please do.
just critical issue of education and empowerment, because that's what Becky is going to speak about.
Yes. So I'm going to talk about some youth prevention that's happening right now in our community. So last year in July, the Jewish Center for Addiction was given a 3-year grant from the Jewish Federation to start a youth initiative for prevention and support regarding substance abuse prevention. So this was done in response to the community's request that this be addressed. There has been and there continues to be an increase in drug-related deaths in the North Shore, the Jewish community, with young adults. And so this is kind of a topic that needs to be addressed, and luckily it is being addressed now. So I started with the JCA and Response back in November, and what I'm doing is going into Jewish schools, summer camps, and shuls to do this prevention program with our youth. So the particular program that we're using that I'm going to talk about is called Partners in Prevention. Partners in Prevention is a substance abuse prevention program that was created at Beit Shuvah, which is a Jewish residential treatment and a spiritual community in Los Angeles. This program was written specifically for Jewish youth by Jewish community leaders, Jews in recovery in Los Angeles, out of the same need that we're seeing here. So substance abuse is an issue in our community, and it has to be addressed with our youth. And to be addressed with our youth while they're still young, before they start developing habits. So a little bit about the program that we're using. So every time I go into a school or a shul, it always comes up at the beginning, and it always comes up kind of in the middle of, why does this program look so different from what I'm used to? And what they mean by that is, this is a program that is not, we're not using scare tactics, not going into schools, not going into these organizations and telling the kids, this is alcohol, this is what alcohol does to you, this is why you should stay away. We're not doing that, and we're not using scare tactics, because that has been proven to be not quite as effective as what this program does, which is using Judaism to promote positive decision-making for youth. And so what this program looks like is it uses looking at the self through the lens of Judaism to make positive decisions and choices. So I'm going to go through the different sections. There's also a handout that each of you have. It's double-sided. So one side is just a brief overview of the program, and then on the other side is just a brief description of the 6 different modules. So the first section is called Who Am I Today? And this is just a very it's an overview and an introduction to the program. So we start off by talking about who we are, having been created by Tzelem Elohim, and we talk about kind of starting where the kids are. So what do you do with your time? Where do you spend your time? Who's in charge of how you spend your time? Is it you? Is it someone else? Where do you fit in? How do you fit in? And naming different places and people where the youth feel comfortable. Then we go on to the second section, which is called My Core Values, and this looks at core values in Judaism and how these core values can impact the youth to guide our decision making to stay free from drugs and alcohol. So concepts such as the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, the good and evil inclinations, they're discussed and how they're intertwined, and this is actually a concept that comes up throughout, whether it's overtly or covertly. It's embedded in this program. Our third section is called My Relationships, and this explores the healthy relationships in our lives, the unhealthy relationships in our lives, who is important to us, where we go when we're struggling, and how we can use these relationships to help us to make the positive decision to stay free from drugs and alcohol. Our fourth section is called My Personal Inventory, and this section takes a look at some personal qualities that we have and whether these personal qualities are going to either harm or support our positive decision making. So during this section, we talk about self-esteem, we talk about selfishness, we talk about people we can also confide in, so you see that these concepts kind of build on each other. We talk about Lashon Hara, we talk about honesty, whether we're acting in honesty versus truth. So lots of big concepts where we can kind of pinpoint what's important to us, what are our personal qualities, and how can we use this to stay free from drugs and alcohol. So as you'll see a lot so far, I haven't really said much about staying free from drugs and alcohol except to promote positive decision making. So once we get to section 5, that's kind of the meat of the staying free from drugs and alcohol. You can see the title is staying free from alcohol and drugs. And it's interesting, so we see kind of around the fourth section, that's when we get the questions asked of, when are we going to start talking about this? And we are talking about it. We're just not saying constantly, like, this is alcohol, this is why you should not drink when you're underage. So this is really the part where we do talk about staying free from drugs and alcohol, but from a different lens of how can we think about our health, how can we think about Judaism, the relationships in our lives, and our future to make the decision for ourselves to stay free from drugs and alcohol. So the conversation is about drugs and alcohol, but I think a little different of a conversation than youth are used to. And then lastly, our sixth journal is called My Future, My Faith, and this really connects the first 5 journals and talks with the youth about the decisions that you make today do have an impact on your future. Where do you want to be? How can we get you there? What decisions can you make to make sure that you get there? So what I really like about this program is that it's really flexible and flexible in a bunch of different ways. There is so much content in these modules that we have for the youth. And I think the most time I have right now, I'm thinking about all of my programs, I think I have an hour, which is the longest I have for one of my sites. In an hour, we get through maybe 4 pages. So what's really nice is depending on the group, depending on the facilitator, depending on the needs of this particular group, you can focus on different concepts. This is a program that is available to the Orthodox community, conservative community, and the Reform community. So it's a really nice program that does get out to all different types of denominations in Judaism. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the setup and why this program is a good program. So it's an evidence-informed program. So it uses a lot of evidence-based practices. It hasn't been tested. Prevention programs are difficult to test, but everything that's used in this program is evidence-based. So one of the things I touched on a little bit already is that the concepts repeat. So what we bring up in module 1 of what do you like about yourself, what do you dislike about yourself, that's something that we talk about in module 1, we talk about in module 3, we talk about in module 4. It repeats. And having this repetition of the concepts really helps to make it stick and kind of gets embedded into the youth and their decision-making processes. Another part, so this program is primarily group discussion, journaling, and role playing. So the group discussion will read the pages in the modules. There are wonderful discussion questions that we've come up with as a team at JCA that Beit Tshuva has given to us, and these discussions really do enhance the conversation. They go beyond what's written in these journals. So there's a lot of journaling in this program, and what's really great about the journaling, so journaling has been studied across many, many disciplines, and it's a very valuable tool in self-exploration and healing and in coping. So we journal at least 3 times during our sessions. It'll be 2 minutes. There's, journaling kind of questions for them to think about, and we don't read this. These journals are for the youth. I think they're not used to having something either in school or at their synagogue where they can, write something and no one's reading it. So I think it takes a little bit also for them to build the trust in us and for us to say, we're not reading this. This is for you. Use it. The more you journal, the more open and honest you are, the more you'll get out of this program. Sometimes we'll talk about some of the questions that we're journaling, but sometimes we won't. Depending on how personal they are, we do want the youth to feel safe, and by talking about some of these really personal things kind of early on might not be the best way to promote trust. So motivational interviewing is also a big concept that's used in this program. So as the facilitators, we do serve as the motivation for youth to make positive changes by encouraging them to, whatever you say, this is for you. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. We express empathy. We support self-efficacy. And by doing this, it really helps to engage the youth and talk to them in a way that we are listening to what you're saying and we want to have these conversations with you. And I think that by opening that door and by encouraging them, it's just they feel supported and they're much more open and willing to give into the program. So like I said, there's a lot of journaling, a lot of group discussion, and this is the basis of the group. We also always offer to the students, so typically in the groups, it'll be someone from JCA or Response, and then someone from the host site. And we always say to the youth at the beginning of the program, if there's something you don't feel comfortable, sometimes we'll go around in a circle at the end and we'll have one final wrap-up question. If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to share. Also, if there's something that you want to talk about afterwards, this person from your school is here, I'm also here, and we can talk about these things. There are places you can go. Once these doors are opened, there's a lot of questions and a lot of kind of pouring out that we're seeing. So, like I said, this is a program that started, we received the grant last July, and in November of 2014 we had 2 trainers from Beit Tshuva in Los Angeles come to Chicago to train our first year cohort. So our hope is to have, we will have 3 cohorts for each year of this grant. So our first year cohort this year we have Ida Crown Jewish Academy, Solomon Schechter, and Beth were the 3 sites that went through the training with us at the beginning. And for these 3 sites, they start with us year 1 and will continue to work with us years 2 and year 3, so throughout the duration of the grant. And then the thought is to have, to add 2 schools, 2 camps, and 2 shuls in year 2, and to add 3 schools, 3 camps, and 3 shuls in year 3. So we actually... So, as I said, we had 2 schools go through the training with us back in November. We just added a 3rd school, so we're reaching and we added another synagogue. So right now, and then we'll be working with camps in the summer, so it's beyond what we thought already in year 1. It hasn't even been a year. And just a little bit about the response that we've gotten so far. So we worked with the freshmen at Ida Crown, and we worked with the 6th graders at Schechter in January, February, and March. And the response that we received was overwhelmingly positive. It seemed that what we were saying was really resonating with the youth, and I think so much so that Schechter asked us to come back, and right now we're working with their 7th grade right now. So this is a program that is really sticking with the youth. It's providing them a place and a space to talk about these really difficult concepts. You know, alcohol use, misuse is going on in their homes. It's happening, and no one's really talking to them about it. So this is providing an outlet. It's going to continue to grow, and we're just happy that we can finally provide this to the community.
Questions?